Oats were once the undisputed breakfast of champions, but today they're caught in a heated debate.
There's good evidence to show that eating oats is healthy for us. However, some oats cause a big spike in blood sugar. That's linked to some unfavourable long-term health effects, like an increased risk of obesity, type 2 diabetes.
Dr. Sarah Berry is Professor in Nutrition at King's College London and Chief Scientist at Zoe. Are oats really good for our hearts?
I think it depends on the type of oats. We've got steel-cut oats. These are the least processed. Then there's another kind of instant oats. These all impact our health differently because of the way they're processed.
We're actually putting oats to the test live on the podcast to sort of break through that controversy. I ate a bowl of instant oats, and Sarah, you didn't eat exactly the same thing as me, did you? You added all those other ingredients. Well, let's scan our blood sugar. Well, interestingly, I've managed to hit 11.1.
I can't believe that. And mine's gone up to 8.4.
Why is your number not the same as my number? What would the ultimate healthy oatmeal recipe look like?
The ultimate healthy oatmeal recipe would be...
Welcome to Zoe, Science and Nutrition, where world-leading scientists explain how their research can improve your health. All right, Sarah. Well, as you know, we always like to start with our quickfire round of questions from our listeners. Are you ready to go?
I am. It's my worst part, Jonathan. I hate having only yes, no. But I'm always game for it.
It's going to be fine. Are oats bad for us?
No.
Are all oats good for us?
No.
Are the heart-healthy labels on oat products lying to us?
Sometimes.
Is oat milk as healthy as some people think?
No.
Is there a healthy way to enjoy oats?
Absolutely.
And so then finally, what's the biggest misconception when it comes to oats?
I think the biggest misconception is that all oats are bad for us.
So I used to eat oatmeal for breakfast every morning, Sarah, or porridge, as my Scottish grandmother would call it. And in fact, that oatmeal porridge was a regular winter breakfast for me whenever I stayed with her, and then long into adulthood. But I haven't actually eaten any oats for breakfast for about the last 5 years. But just a few minutes ago, you and I both ate a bowl of oatmeal. And during this episode, I think you're going to explain what's going on, and we're both going to discover in real time how this meal has been affecting our blood sugar. And that's because both of us put on a blood sugar sensor yesterday. So I'm very excited to see the results and hopefully settle the controversy around oats once and for all. But before we start to look at what's going on, just start with what are oats and what happens to them before they arrived in my bowl?
Yeah, so oats are a type of seed or a whole grain that comes from the oat grass. And this is called the Avena sativa plant, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. They're very much like a wheat kind of plant, and the seed is encapsulated within this hull, which is like the kind of shell. And what happens is that is removed because you wouldn't be able to eat that shell. And what you're left behind is with the oat grain or the oat seed. And that consists of this outer bran layer, which is slightly brown orangey, which is what you sometimes see in your oat flakes. You see a little specks, don't you, of this kind of brown and orange, and that's from this outer skin. And then within that outer skin is the main part of the oat, which we call the endosperm. And it's within that endosperm that contains all of the starch, so all of the carbohydrate, as well as some fiber and as well as some protein. And then in the outer layer, that skin, we often call it the bran, that contains a lot of fiber. And so an oat seed typically contains about 60 to 70% carbohydrates. It contains about 10% of protein, which is quite high for a whole grain. And it contains a very special type of fiber called beta-glucan. It also contains lots of vitamins, so particularly B vitamins, and it contains lots of minerals, so magnesium, zinc, iron, manganese. And it contains some bioactives, which we call polyphenols, and it contains a particular type of bioactive.
So it sounds a little bit, like I'm thinking about now, like it's a bit like wheat or something that I'm familiar with. It's like it's growing on the grass and it's sort of the seed, and then it has all these different things inside it.
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit like wheat. And what happens is that it is then processed in different ways to form different types of oats that we would commonly recognize. So the kind of main seed that we're left with that's edible is actually called a groat. And so this is the seed that has that bran skin on and then that kind of starchy endosperm. And these are typically then cut using steel into what we call steel cut oats. And these are groats that are literally cut about 2 or 3 times. So they're quite chunky. These are the least processed oats, and they take quite a long time to cook. So they might take about 30 minutes, for example, on a hob to cook. But you can eat those as porridge. Then what you can do as well is actually roll the groat. So you roll that oat grain, and that's what gives you the rolled oats. So typically they're steamed or cooked a little bit before so that they're soft enough to roll. And then when you roll them out, that's what a rolled oat essentially is, just a rolled groat.
And Sarah, when you say rolled, like, do you mean like somehow squashed between like 2 big rollers or something so that it goes flat and thin? Is that what that means?
Really heavy, not the kind of thing you could do with a rolling pin, I don't imagine, at home. I mean, I've never tried it. But using industrial techniques to roll it at high pressure so that it becomes this flat rolled oat.
Got it. So it's flattened, and you said it's also like cooked a little bit through this process to allow that to happen.
So most rolled oats will be steamed a little bit to soften them a little bit so that they can then be rolled. Then there's another kind of oatmeal or porridge that we can also commonly buy in our supermarkets, which is the instant oats. And essentially, these are the rolled oats that have been pre-cooked so that they're very quick and easy for us to cook. So the groats, which are these that are then steel cut, will probably take about, on average, 30 minutes to cook on the hob. The rolled oats that have only had a little bit of steaming before in order to roll them would probably take about 20 minutes or so to cook on the hob. And then the instant ones have been pre-cooked, rolled, and therefore they can take just a couple of minutes or 5 minutes to cook on the hob.
That's interesting, because when I grew up, my grandmother made me this oatmeal often, but she definitely boiled it on the stove with milk. And, I remember that very well. It's like part of the process, as a child, there's something sort of, you associate it then with the food that's afterwards. And when I grew up, then I switched to like this oatmeal porridge in a packet that I could just rip open, put in a bowl, put in the microwave, and you could eat the whole thing in a couple of minutes. And so you're saying it's the same oat in those 2 examples, but in the second one, it's sort of been pre-cooked and like chopped up more than in the first one, it seemed to me.
So you have some kind of instant oats that are literally the rolled oats that just have been pre-cooked. And then you've got the kind of super quick instant oats that are the kind of ones that often you find in the sachets that often are more finely ground. So it increases the surface area, so it's even more quick for us to cook. Often those also have added ingredients, like golden syrup or sugar or other things added to them as well. You can also go even one step further, Jonathan, to produce what's called oat flour. And that is literally, again, just the oats really, really finely ground into a flour. And you can also produce something called oat bran. So you've probably heard of oat bran. It's often added back into cereals or added in an ingredient or a thickener. And the oat bran is just the brown outer skin from oats. So it's very rich in fibre. So they're the key forms that are used. So we've got the steel cut groats, so the steel cut oats. We've got the rolled oats. We've got the instant pre-cooked rolled oats. Then we've got these super, super instant oats. And then you've got the flours. You've got the whole oat flour. And then you've also got the oat bran. And these all, because of the way they're processed, impact our health slightly differently.
And I think our little experiment over the last 24 hours is going to help to explain that. So I know I am doing the experiment in my body right now. But before I think you're ready to start to let me measure myself and start to explain it, I want to come to the biggest question that our listeners had. And just over and over, the biggest question was, are oats really good for our heart, like the heart healthy labels that they're seen on all sorts of foods?
So I think it depends on the type of oats. And as I say with every podcast we do, I always say it depends and it's more nuanced. But overall, I think the overall body of evidence shows that most oats, not all oats, are certainly good for our heart health because of the properties that they have in lowering our cholesterol, in controlling our blood glucose, and some other beneficial effects as well.
I just want to say thank you, first and foremost, for being part of this community. The team here at Zoe Science and Nutrition has very big dreams for this show. And that's thanks to you. When you watch and subscribe and leave comments and submit your questions, we reach more people. And that empowers us on our mission to improve the health of millions. And we've got huge plans to grow this show even more this year. If there's one thing you could do to help us do that, it's just to hit the subscribe button. It means the world to us. Okay, back to the show. Now, we also had a lot of questions from listeners asking if oats are unhealthy. Why do people think that?
So there's a lot of information that you see around the unhealthful impacts of oats, mainly around two reasons. One, that oats cause a big spike in blood sugar, and the other that they are potentially contaminated with a herbicide called glyphosate, which has been linked with cancer.
And we're going to get into that through this episode?
We are, absolutely. I love myth busting.
Brilliant. So Sarah, what we're doing today to sort of break through that controversy is actually putting oats, to the test live on the podcast, which is very exciting. So about 20 minutes ago, we both participated in your experiment. So I ate a bowl of instant oats cooked in water and just that. And Sarah, you ate an identical bowl with exactly the same amount of oats and water, except you were lucky enough that you got to add nuts and seeds and nut butter and dried fruit. And if you're watching the video version of this podcast, I think you're about to see that actually happen in action. So you can see how Sarah, measured this all out like a proper nutritional scientist and explains a bit more about how that was being prepared.
So, Jonathan, you're a very lucky man today because I am going to be preparing your breakfast. Now, yesterday you had rolled oats with water on their own. I had exactly the same rolled oats, exactly the same amount, which was 40 grams, in exactly the same amount of water, which was 200 mils. And I also had a mixture of nuts and seeds and also some nut butter as well. So what we're going to do today is we're going to replicate what we did yesterday. We're going to use exactly the same amounts, which is really, really important if you want to replicate the same experiment. But today we're going to have a different type of oats. And today we're going to have oats that are really finely ground. And we're going to see how this affects our blood sugar response. But really important, we're going to have the same amount of oats, the same amount of water. I'm lucky that I get all of these nice toppings, but you're going to have them naked. Okay?
And I think about these as being like the microwave oats. Because yesterday I did it like the traditional way on the stove. And this is what I think about often as just like being in a packet that I can put in the microwave.
Yeah. So the more processed or more finely ground the oats are, the quicker they cook, which is why we can microwave these. These are often called instant oats. And yet the oats you had yesterday take longer to cook. Are you hungry?
I'm starving because I've been told I have to fast, Sarah, until you're ready for the experiment. And it's well past my normal breakfast time.
And I know that makes you hungry. So we're doing 40 grams of this, which actually looks quite a lot because of the powder nature of it. But it actually contains not that much nutrients despite it being 40 grams. Okay, so we've got exactly 40 grams. And now into that, we are going to put 200 mils of this water. There we go. Give it a stir. Now I'm going to pop this in the microwave for a couple of minutes, and then you are going to have the pleasure of eating this.
Amazing. And then you get yours with all the stuff on top.
Yes. So what I'm going to do now is prepare mine. So I'm going to do it in exactly the same way, which is really important. So I'm also going to do 40 grams.
Yesterday, the oats that we use to make the porridge, like they still look very much sort of like an oat. This you can see as being really powdered and sort of ground up.
So this is a really fine powder. It actually contains exactly the same ingredients as the oats we had yesterday. All it's changed is that it's finely ground into this powder. But that will affect how our body processes it. And we've often talked in previous podcasts, Jonathan, about the food matrix and the structure and how that impacts our metabolism. And this is going to be a great illustration of that. So now I'm adding 200 mils of the water. So at the moment, both of our bowls are identical. So we've both got 40 grams of this finely ground oats, and we've got 200 mils of water. Okay, so Jonathan, I'm going to go and microwave these for a couple of minutes, and then I get to add my lovely toppings after. So Jonathan, here is your lovely porridge.
Wonderful, thank you.
Now, what I'm doing is adding to mine exactly what I added yesterday, which is 40 grams of nuts, seeds, and dried berries. And I've got exactly the same amount of each nut, seed, and berry, because it's really important that we match everything. So I'm also adding some nut butter. And again, exactly the same amount that I added yesterday, which was 20 grams of nut butter. So what I've added here is essentially lots of fibre, lots of protein, and also lots of healthy fats on top of the porridge that we're eating, which is what I did yesterday. But you've got the porridge on its own. So what you've got is just 100% of oats, very finely ground. So we're going to eat these now. Now, it's really important if we're doing an experiment like this, we eat them at the same pace within the same time. So we have 5 minutes to eat these, and then we're going to look at how this impacts our blood sugar after. So Jonathan, what we're going to do now is we're going to scan our blood sugar levels. So we're both wearing a sensor. This is our continuous glucose monitor. What I want you to do is scan that. We're then going to eat our porridge within 5 minutes, and then we're going to scan it in about an hour.
I'm going to scan this here. Okay, and I don't know whether you can see that on the camera. So Sarah, what does this mean?
So yours is 6.7 millimoles, which is a perfectly healthy blood glucose. It's probably slightly on the high side for fasting. Mine is 5.8, which obviously is a little bit lower and probably a little bit healthier for a fasting glucose value.
And I can see that it's basically been flat since last night with like this little spike when I woke up and started to walk around. But you can see that I haven't cheated and I haven't had any breakfast, which is why I am a little hungry.
Ditto. So I've got that little peak that's very common when people first wake up in the morning to have a little bit of a peak. But I'm also flat, hence why I'm really hungry as well. So let's set the timer.
And what I would say is it looks exactly the same as the porridge oats that I ate yesterday. But as I turn it round, it's like much stickier than the porridge I had yesterday. It's like almost like a bit gluey. So I think now you said we're allowed to check our blood sugar, Sarah, but you also said that we're both supposed to check how we're feeling right now. Is that right?
Yeah, so we will check our blood sugar so we can see, but also what we eat can change how we feel in as little as 30 minutes, how full we feel, our alertness levels, our mood, our energy levels, etc. And really importantly, our hunger levels. So I guess the thing to ask you is how hungry do you feel or not feel?
Well, interestingly, I hadn't thought about it until just now. And actually, I feel like I've got a little bit of a headache. So I'm really interested to see what happens when I go and check my blood sugar, because that sort of instant oats breakfast is not what I normally have for breakfast anymore. And of course, I also ate later than I normally would. How about you? How do you feel?
I feel great. But mine was a very balanced plate, as we'll dive into. So I feel really full, which is nice, because often if I choose the wrong type of breakfast, I can feel hungry very quickly after.
Well, I'm definitely not hungry now. Let's go and see what happens with our blood sugar. Shall I? We're going to scan mine and show you what I've got, Sarah. Here we go. Wow. Can you see that?
So Jonathan's has just gone up to 10.7. I can't believe that. Well, I can believe it, but I'm quite surprised. And mine's gone up to 8.4. So this is higher for me than what my blood sugar was yesterday.
So Sarah, I just had 10.7 and my number, when we scanned it 20 minutes ago was around 6. What does any of that mean? What's going on?
So what's happening is the carbohydrate from the oats is being processed and broken down into glucose molecules. And the glucose molecules are now passing through your bloodstream. And this is what we're detecting from the glucose monitor that you're wearing on your arm. So you're seeing this increase in circulating glucose from the carbohydrates that are in those oats. And this increases within 5 to 10 minutes after eating any carbohydrate-rich meals. Typically, it peaks around 30 minutes. So it'll be interesting to see what it looks like in about 10 or 15 minutes.
And it seems to me that that number has shot through the roof in the last 20 minutes when I ate this instant oats. In fact, I have worn these before. I don't think I've managed to get above 10 with anything I eat in the last 3 or 4 years. I definitely did used to go above 10 before I started at Zoe. So that's a pretty impressive spike I've achieved, isn't it?
Yeah, that's quite a big increase in blood sugar levels. Now, an increase in blood sugar after carbohydrate-rich meal is a normal physiological response. But once it starts to get really high, quite often it can impact how you're feeling in the moment. So it might be that you have a slight headache, or you might feel that your heart is racing a little bit. Also, about 2 to 4 hours after having quite a big peak like that, you might get a dip in blood glucose. And we found from our own Zoe research that that dip can drive increased hunger, increased food intake. It can give you poor energy, poor alertness. What we also know is if you are eating every day, all of your meals to cause that kind of peak, that over a sustained period of time, we know that that's linked to some unfavorable long-term health effects, like an increased risk of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. So I would not recommend, based on that, you having instant porridge on its own with water for every meal of the day. Absolutely.
Or even every breakfast, right?
No, because you're likely as well to just not feel great for the rest of the day, because it sets you up on that kind of roller coaster where you're having the big peak, you're having this dip, it's driving you then to go and have a quick fix to get your blood sugar back up. You're then eating more at your next meal, and you'll probably feel less energetic, less alert. So yeah, I wouldn't advise that.
Now, Sarah, you didn't eat exactly the same thing as me, did you? You added all those other ingredients onto these instant oats. Why is your number not the same as my number, Sarah?
So I added nut seeds, dried berries, and some nut butter, and they contain extra fiber, extra protein, and extra fat. And we know that fiber, fat, and protein impact the rate at which our stomach empties. They impact also the rate at which blood glucose is then absorbed from the bloodstream, and also some hormones like insulin, which obviously also impact how we metabolize the blood sugar. So by adding and layering on this extra fat, protein, and fiber, it modulates how quickly we absorb the glucose. So it modulates this rise in blood sugar.
And Sarah, when you say modulates, what does that mean?
So it modifies, it changes. So in the case of these particular ingredients and these particular nutrients, it's reducing. So it's slowing down the rate at which it's entering the bloodstream, but also changing the rate at which it's also kind of being absorbed later on.
Now, I know what we have with our meal is one part, but also it's true that we don't all respond the same, right, as we eat these meals. And you already showed that like my baseline blood sugar was higher than yours. So even with your pairing, Sarah, and the fact that your blood sugar control is better than mine, isn't it? I think when we've done these Zoe tests, it turns out that my blood sugar control is really quite poor. My memory is that yours is fairly good.
Yeah, mine is a little bit better than yours, yes.
And I remember the first time that I ever did this test with Zoe, with my blood sugar sensor, this was the thing that blew my mind, because I sort of thought like these oats, right? They're really healthy for you. And yet I was having this response, which was sort of as fast as when I just drank a sugary drink. And it seems to me that what you're seeing there, Sarah, is even when you've mixed in those other things, that this instant oats it feels like it's almost like you're having sugar with your yogurt. What's going on there?
Yeah, and it's all to do with the magic of the food matrix that we often talk about here at Zoe, which basically is the structure of the food. So the structure of what we ate yesterday was different to the structure of what we ate today. And it's interesting because there's actually been lots and lots of clinical trials as well that have had a look at whether what we're seeing between us today actually plays out when you recruit lots of different people and ask them one day to eat, one type of porridge. So for example, there was a clinical trial where they asked people to eat one day these steel cut oats, another day the rolled oats, another day instant oats, and another day really heavily processed oats that are used often in breakfast cereals like Cheerios. And what they found, similar to what we've observed today, is that the less processed, the lower the blood sugar response. So the steel cut oats cause the lowest increase in blood sugar after eating. The rolled oats that we had yesterday called only a moderate increase, but as it became more processed up to the level of the oats that we had today, you got a bigger increase. And it's because of changing the structure, changing the rate at which the stomach empties it, the rate at which they're absorbed, that you see these differences. And we've done a study at King's actually where we fed people whole rolled oats, and people were fed oat flour, which is essentially pretty much what we ate in this last experiment. And they see that the whole large oats stick around in the stomach for longer. So they see this lower increase in circulating blood glucose or blood sugar. They see that the whole rolled oats stay in the stomach for quite a bit of time compared to the powders. So the oats that we had this morning are really quickly entering our bloodstream.
Gut health is health. Become a Zoe member and start listening to your gut with a comprehensive at-home test kit and personalized nutrition program. Our personalized food scores change how you think about food for good. And photo food logging lets you instantly see how meals score for your body. You can't put a price on your health, but if you did, Zoe's worth it. Most of what we've been told about food is wrong. Listen to your gut and feel better in weeks. Become a Zoe member today.
So actually, Sarah, what's going on now? So you explained what happened that when you're eating, like the way I'm sort of thinking a bit now, I'm sort of like imagining like piranhas in the Amazon, and so they're like ripping, like when I eat, they're like ripping apart the food, and it's a bit similar to like I fall in the Amazon River and the piranhas are at you, and clearly if you're small, they can like rip you apart really, really fast, right? Whereas if it's some enormous thing, it's going to take a long time. And it's that's sort of the analogy I'm reaching for with the difference between the oats that are all pre-cooked and powdered, that basically, if my body is these piranhas getting it off into the bloodstream, then it does it almost immediately. But these whole oats, it's like slow and takes a long time to be able to break apart the carbohydrates. Is that, you're looking at me, I think this may not be my best metaphor.
I think that's a crazy metaphor, but obviously that blood sugar spike's doing
the
something
and
to your brain.
And the blood sugar.
So the large rolled oats, when they enter your stomach, there's less surface area for the enzymes to get to, is one of the things. They also form bigger clumps inside the stomach. So there's even less than overall surface area for the enzymes. And it's the enzymes that break the starch, which is the carbohydrate.
And Sarah, so I think you said enzymes and I thought piranhas, but is that not the right way to
It's
think
a good
about
enough
this?
analogy. So enzymes are like kind of chemicals, I guess you could say, that break down bonds. They break our food down. So when we have a carbohydrate, which is what we call a complex, starch is a complex carbohydrate, you have these enzymes, these chemicals that need to break it down to very simple carbohydrates, because it's only the simple carbohydrates that we can actually absorb into our blood or that we can use, for energy, etc. So the starch that's in the oat seed needs to be broken down by these chemical enzymes into the simple sugar, which is glucose. And so the bigger the surface area, the more the enzymes, I guess, can kind of attack, using your analogy, to break it down into glucose.
And my stomach is full of these enzymes?
So you have some enzymes in your mouth that start to break down some of the bonds in the carbohydrates. You have some in your stomach. And you have a lot though as it passes through your intestine, so it passes through your small intestine, from where it's then absorbed as these very simple sugars, what we call glucose, into the bloodstream.
So I'd love to talk a minute about what might be starting to happen now inside my blood, because I feel like I'm going to check again, but I'm certainly hoping that it's not going to continue to spike, because that seems quite scary. Let's see what's going on.
So what should be happening now, Jonathan, is most of those oats have been emptied from the stomach. Most of it's has passed through the small intestine, and most of it, the enzymes would have broken down. Most of it's come into the blood, but you'll also be releasing hormones such as insulin that then, in simple terms, remove the sugar from the blood, so that you should start to be having a reduction in the levels.
So my number is down to 10.1. So you can just sort of see on there's a little graph there that it's starting to dip down. So this is now my body pulling the sugar out of my blood?
Yeah, in simple terms, it's the insulin, which is a hormone that's released when you eat carbohydrate-rich meals, that then controls the level of sugar in your blood and deposits in the different places that it needs to go, whether it needs to go to the muscle or whether it needs to go to the liver, etc.
So I'd love to finish talking about the experiment, about the sort of the personalization aspect of this. You've explained that the different ways in which we grind up these oats has this profound difference. And you've also said that when you wrap it with like other sort of healthier foods, which you were describing, and the fats that sort of can slow down the absorption. Why is it, though, that I am having just a stronger response than you for the same foods? What's going on there, and what does that mean about how I should think about what I eat?
So you're firstly having a strong response because we're not eating exactly the same, and you're having a meal that is essentially very available carbohydrate that is broken down very quickly into glucose, which is what we're measuring when we talk about blood sugar. But also, we're all very individual in terms of our biology, in terms of also, how we're living our lives. That all impacts our blood sugar responses. So we know from our own Zoe research that how much we slept last night can impact our blood sugar response. So if you've had a bad night's sleep compared to me, you're likely to have a higher blood sugar response. Your stress levels can impact it. The time of day that you're having it, you can impact it, as well as what you typically eat can impact it as well. In addition to that, we know that biological differences, so age, sex, menopause status, genetics, and so many other factors related to who you are biologically versus who I am. And this is what we've been looking at over the last 7 years. So we're trying to disentangle all of this so that we can give people the best advice in terms of what to eat best for their health. But I think it's also important to say, Jonathan, that we often talk about Zoe about the importance of blood glucose, but also recognizing that it's one piece of a huge puzzle in terms of how a food impacts our health. So while some of the oats yesterday that you ate caused a blood sugar peak, there are other benefits to oats beyond the blood sugar. So I would say that yes, for you, it's not the best breakfast because you're going to feel pretty rubbish having, that massive peak, as you said now, with your headache. But I would say that there are other benefits that we need to consider that make it perhaps a healthier choice than white bread and honey.
So I'd love to transition to that, because I think we talked a lot about the blood sugar because we've had the fun of this experiment. But you're telling me it's not the only thing that matters when we think about the health of oats. So could you talk about what else to think about?
Yeah, so I'd love to take a step back and first look at, is there evidence to show in populations that eating oats are even healthy for us? And there's some fantastic data that's come from what we call the epidemiological studies, which are studies in large populations where they've followed people for a long period of time and looked at, depending on whether people are oat eaters or not oat eaters, whether that affects their risk of disease. And in one such study where they followed more than 500,000 individuals over many years, they found that people who were oat eaters versus those who didn't eat any oats actually had lower rates of type 2 diabetes by about 15% and lower all-cause mortality, which basically means risk of dying. And that was by about 20%. Now, obviously, there's lots of other things that might explain some of this. People who eat oats tend to smoke less, etc. But you can actually adjust for that in the analysis. You can never fully disentangle it. So it's not kind of the strongest evidence to pull on. But that gives us an idea that there's something going on there, that there's something about eating oats that might be beneficial for our health. And so the next thing we need to look at is clinical trials and also, is there a mechanism? Is there some kind of rationale at why we might be seeing this? And what we know is that oats contain a very special fibre called beta-glucan. And this fibre is well known to reduce circulating cholesterol levels. So to reduce total cholesterol, but also reduce LDL, which is our bad cholesterol that we know is linked to heart disease. And there's been lots of clinical trials that have been published showing that if you add oats to a meal or the beta-glucan to a meal, that you can significantly reduce people's cholesterol levels. It needs to be at about a certain dose. So we know that you need to be having about 3 grams of the beta-glucan a day in order to lower your cholesterol. And so the FDA in the US and the EFSA, the European Food Standards Agency in the UK, actually have an approved health claim that beta-glucan, this fibre that's in oats, at 3 grams a day can reduce your cholesterol and hence is associated with improved heart health. And I think the evidence is quite consistent for that.
If I understand it rightly, what you're saying is that it's the fiber in the oat that is giving you these health benefits, and there's some really good scientific evidence to support the health benefits. And it's not the starchy carbohydrate that you were talking about before. It's just a thing I feel like we come back to over and over again in this podcast. It's sort of the fiber and the plant part of it, as it were, that's doing this.
Yeah. Like with all food, there's often a double-edged sword, and there's components in foods that might be really, really great for us. And there might be another component in the same food that isn't so healthy for us. But this is why we have to look at the food in its totality, which is what we do a lot at Zoe, rather than looking at individual components. So we need to look at that oat in terms of also who you are. So if you're someone that has this big blood sugar response, that's not going to be the best food for you. For me, I have less of a blood sugar response. If I had slightly elevated cholesterol, then maybe I want to make it part of, my daily routine, having some oats in there in order to reduce my cholesterol.
And is the beta-glucans the only thing about the oats that's contributing to that health effect?
So we think the beta-glucans is one of the main elements that makes oats healthy because of how it can reduce our cholesterol. We know, though, that in addition to how beta-glucans impact our cholesterol levels, that they may also reduce our risk of type 2 diabetes. There's quite good evidence to show that if you consume oats, you have lower risk of type 2 diabetes and you have better insulin control, which might seem a little counterintuitive given the experiment that we've just done. But the beta-glucans that are in oats cause the contents of your stomach and also your intestine to be quite sticky, like gel-like. And we use a term in science called viscosity. So beta-glucans increase the viscosity, so the stickiness of its surroundings. So, when you had your finely ground oats today, something that you said to me is, oh, they're really gloopy. And you said it was actually like wallpaper paste, didn't you? Because It's so sticky. That's because it's the beta-glucans in the porridge causing this kind of stickiness. And so that's what it does in the stomach, which is why it kind of slows down the gastric emptying. It also does that in your small intestine, and it lines a little bit the surface of your small intestine. So it does slow the absorption of the sugar a little bit. So if you were to compare the breakfast that you had today, although it caused the big blood sugar peak, if you were then to compare it with the matched amount of sugar, you should find that the peak, although high, is actually lower because of the beta-glucans. And this is where it gets a little bit interesting, because you also said that the breakfast you had today was more gloopy than the breakfast you had yesterday. And that's because the more you grind down the grain, the more of the beta-glucan is released. So this is where you get that double-edged sword with processing, that the way it was processed today, where it's a powder, is causing these big peaks in glucose, but you're getting slightly more of the beta-glucan. And yet what you had yesterday, you had a lower peak in blood glucose, but you might get slightly less of the beta-glucan. So it's kind of like balancing that out a little bit. And this is where personalization, I think, can be really valuable.
You're talking again about the impact of the beta-glucan. Is there anything else in the oat that you think that's contributing to these health benefits?
Yeah, so oats are also packed full of B vitamins, of also other minerals like the iron, the magnesium, etc. They also have polyphenols. There's a particular type of polyphenol, and I can't remember the name. It's very long. It begins with A. And there is some evidence that this polyphenol has beneficial impacts on blood pressure, on pathways associated with inflammation, oxidative stress, and also has some beneficial impacts on blood vessel function. Now, it's difficult to tease apart where the benefits of oats on heart health is coming from. Is it all from the beta-glucans, or is this polyphenol also impacting that as well? Again, I think it's kind of the whole grain and all of the different components that are having that beneficial effect.
I wanted to come on to another question that we got from our listeners a lot, which is about pesticides in oats. And I think one of the reasons I might have asked it is that we did a podcast a while ago about organic foods with Professor Tim Spector, who we both know well, and oats was one of the foods that he talked about in terms of pesticides. So what's the situation and how worried do you think we should be?
So there's a particular pesticide that is used to dry out oats before harvesting so that they can be harvested more quickly. It's a chemical called glyphosate. It's also found in common pesticides that you can go and get in your DIY store, like Roundup, for example. And what it does is it dries out the grain so you can harvest it more quickly and so you can produce it more quickly. Now, you've got to remember the grain has this outer hull, this kind of shell, so it should be a little bit protected from it. But there is some evidence that oats will still absorb some of this pesticide. Oats seem to absorb it more than some of the other whole grains like wheat, for example. And so there are small levels found in many oats. Now, organic oats rarely contain this because them being organic, this pesticide isn't sprayed. But occasionally you'll find some organic oats that might have tiny, tiny amounts because, you're getting stuff leached from soil from neighbouring fields, for example. There are very strict regulations about the level of glyphosates that are found in food and in oats because there has been a link with cancer. Most of the evidence, though, linking it to cancer comes from kind of cell sort of lab experiments or from animals. The evidence in humans is quite weak, but there is sufficient evidence to set tolerable limits above which we know there is potentially an increased risk of cancer. So there's regulations internationally in the US, in the UK, in Europe, for example, of safe, tolerable upper limits above which there is a probable association with cancer. So there's some carcinogens, so cancer-causing agents that we have great confidence that cause cancer. So alcohol is one of those. So alcohol is classed as a type 1 carcinogen that we know is linked to an increased risk of cancer. Glyphosate is classed as a probable carcinogenic. The levels that are found in most foods are actually quite low. I think unless you are eating oats all day long, day after day, it is almost impossible to reach that safe upper limit. Now, obviously, it's going to vary from one farm to the next farm. And so it's difficult to kind of blanket say that they are all safe. But I think that the levels that are generally found in food, based on the evidence that I've seen, based on the random sampling that is published, I don't think it's something we should worry too much about at all. However, if you can buy organic oats, if they're affordable and accessible for you, I would recommend that you choose organic over non-organic. But if that's not accessible for you, I think you can still enjoy your porridge or oatmeal without worrying about it too much. As scientists, we always err on the side of caution. So, for example, the tolerable limit that's set for glyphosate is a very cautious limit. It's also a level at which you're very unlikely to reach through normal dietary patterns. I say unlikely, not impossible. It's also a level that is set based on feeding at these excessive levels to rats or mice and looking at how cancer may develop. So I think the level is already very cautious. And then I'm adding some caution to that, because I think we have to be so careful with areas that we don't yet have the full evidence. And so that's why I'm being overcautious, that personally, I would happily eat non-organic oats if I was having them every day in every meal and I could afford it. Yes, I would choose organic. Why take even a 0.000% risk? But what I wouldn't want people to do who can't afford or it's not accessible for them to have organic, I wouldn't want them to say, okay, scare them off ever having oats.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to one of the questions we had in the Quickfire at the beginning.
Yep.
Because that also came up all the time from our listeners. Is oat milk healthy?
Oh, oat milk. We've done a whole podcast on this, Jonathan, about plant-based milks. I don't know if you remember that. That was about 2 years ago. Can I say it depends again? So I think it's important to understand quickly what oat milk is. So oat milk typically, and every oat milk variety is different, and I know some people make it at home in a very different way. So oat milk typically that we purchase in a supermarket typically contains about 10% oats. Most of the rest of it is water. Now, what they do to those oats to stop you having a drink that's all gloopy, like the wallpaper of paste that we talked about earlier, what they do is they firstly heat up those oats and dissolve them in water and finely grind them. They then add enzymes in to break down the starch, so to break down that carbohydrate, so to break it down into those simple glucose sugar molecules. So what that means is you've got readily accessible sugar in that oats. They also add other ingredients in like rapeseed oil, other kind of additives and stabilizers, etc., to come up with this final product that's essentially mainly water with a little bit of oats that have been degraded and then some of these added ingredients. Now, there is evidence to show that oat milk can reduce your cholesterol because it does have the beta-glucan in, but you have to drink about 2 pints or a litre of this to get that required amount of beta-glucan that we know can lower cholesterol. But there have been trials. There's been clinical trials that have compared oat milk versus cow's milk. The oat milk, if drank around a litre a day, does significantly reduce your cholesterol, but you're unlikely to ever drink that high amount. Also, you've obviously got this quite accessible sugar in there. You've got these other added ingredients. If you're choosing oat milk for planetary health or for animal welfare reasons, then I think that's a great choice for you. If you're choosing it because you think it's healthy or healthier than cow's milk, and you're spending 10 times as much, because often these are 10 times expensive, then I think that the better option personally is to go for cow's milk.
If I understand rightly, that's because you're saying it's a bit similar to the oatmeal that we just had for breakfast. It's all been smashed up. It sounds like it's already been almost like semi-absorbed. So actually there's a lot of sugar in this drink. And when I drink it, it's already very sugary. So it's not quite as healthy as I had in mind. And that's quite different from when I think about just like a traditional cow's milk, which is mainly fat.
Yeah, so I think the problem a little bit with oat milk is it's sold under this kind of health halo of being so good for our health. Yeah, essentially it's mainly water, so you're paying a lot for the water. The oat that's in there has already been degraded. So remember we talked about enzymes and how these chemicals break up the starch and the carbohydrate in your stomach and in your intestine down to these simple sugars. They actually add those enzymes in so that it breaks it down already. So you've got this readily accessible carbohydrate, this very rapid sugar, so to say. Now, at the level at which most people will eat this, so for example, adding it to their tea or in cereal, which is quite low, it's not going to be unhealthy for you. It's more people buying it because they think it's going to be really healthy. I think that's where I would just say a little bit of caution. If you like it, environmental health, planetary health, if you like the taste, if you can afford it, fine, go with it. And just a reminder as well, yes, if you've got high cholesterol, then it might be a better alternative as well. But to have any benefits, you're going to need to be drinking quite a lot. And then you've got to weigh up the potential effect that the readily accessible sugar might have.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think this is all incredibly clear and helpful. And a lot of it's been actionable already, but I'd love to maybe finish with helping any of our listeners to understand, okay, I would like to have oats as part of my diet. How do I figure out how to eat it in a way where I can get the benefits that you're describing, but avoid like the terrible downsides that, for example, you've made me experience today? So maybe start with like, what would the ultimate healthy oatmeal recipe look like?
Okay, so the ultimate healthy oatmeal recipe would firstly include steel cut oats as the foundation, or the proper old-fashioned large rolled oats that haven't been pre-cooked. Either of those, but steel cut oats would be their preference. Then it would include adding something in. So as though we're all about adding stuff in, not taking it away. So adding in something that's got additional protein, additional fat, healthy fats, and potentially additional fiber. So just like I did this morning, depending on your preferences, that could be adding in yogurt. So you could add in Greek yogurt, kefir, you could add in nuts, seeds, some dried berries. Although they're quite high in sugar, they've also got a great amount of fiber as well. You could add in some of the nut butters that are out there. I mean, that's a great way of packing in fiber, protein, healthy fats.
And if I want to think about cooking this, what's the best way to do it? I know quite a few friends of mine who are saying, oh, I really like this, like soaking it overnight. Is that good? Does that suddenly make it back like this instant oats? How should I think about that versus obviously, one of the big disadvantages is, and there's a reason why we all switch to microwave, isn't it? Which is that cooking it in the morning takes time, but also like you've got a pan and, it's become all gluey.
So I don't actually know if there's been any studies looking at the health effects of overnight oats versus the kind of traditional way we cook, in a pan or in a microwave. So I'd be interested actually to know if there has been that research. So I can't tell you which is better in terms of overnight soaked oats or traditionally cooked. What we do know, so kind of rule of thumb, the longer it's taking to cook them, the better it is for your health. So if your porridge or your oatmeal is taking less than, say, 20 or 15 minutes to cook, it's likely it's going to be of a structure, therefore, that isn't quite as good for us as if it was like the steel cut oats that take, 20 minutes or more to cook.
If I took some of those oats you've told me are good, like the steel cut or sort of those jumbo rolled ones, and I did do the overnight oats, would you be worried that now that isn't going to be good for me anymore? Or are you saying like, no, actually you feel that would be okay as part of my diet?
Yeah, based on what I know, I would say that doing the overnight oats would still be good for you. So I would say that it's the type of oats that are important rather than the way that you're cooking them. So if you're taking the steel cut oats, the jumbo rolled oats, and either cooking them on the hob, or you can cook them in the microwave, or leaving them overnight as these soaked overnight oats, then based on my knowledge, I would say that they're all going to give you some health benefits. But it's adding that extra protein and fat on top of them that I think will really balance out the oats as a really good balanced meal that will leave you feeling fuller for longer, balance out your energy, alertness, etc. And you are about to yawn. And that's probably because you are now an hour probably post us having the oats earlier. And I'd be quite surprised not to start to see a bit of a dip. And this is because you didn't have that balance, Jonathan.
So I imagine that a lot of listeners are saying, I really want to make sure I pick the right oatmeal, the right oats tomorrow. Can you help them when they're looking on the label, I guess partly what is good, but also what the sort of things to look out for that would make you realize it wasn't?
So look to see if it's steel cut. These are a lot more difficult to find in the UK in your typical supermarkets than they are in the US, but you should be able to find them in many of the kind of whole food stores or some of the smaller retailers. If you can't find them, go for the rolled oats. Some people might not like the steel cut ones either because they are, slightly chunkier. Go for the rolled oats. Make sure you look at the back of pack labeling to also look at how long it says they're going to take to cook. The longer they're going to take to cook, we believe that they're likely to be more healthy for us. Also check they haven't got loads of added ingredients. So some of the kind of individual sachets that you can get that you can cook, as well as having the oats, and therefore the benefits of the oats also unfortunately have lots of other stuff added in, like added sugar, added flavors, etc.
And Sarah, how many ingredients should there be in a packet of oats?
There should be one.
That's easy.
Oats. So just look for that. The breakfast we had earlier, as well as having the oats, it also had the oat flour as well, and it had lots of other ingredients.
I think that's really clear. We also had a lot of questions about whether oats are gluten-free.
So oats are gluten-free. The only thing to watch out for is some manufacturers will say that the oats are processed in a factory that might also process ingredients that do contain gluten. So not all will give a gluten-free guarantee, but oats per se are gluten-free.
And then final question. If you're like me and your blood sugar control is really poor, you listen to all of this and you're like, well, I'm not going to make this like something I'm having every day in my diet because I'm very conscious about that impact that I've seen with oats compared to quite a lot of other foods. Are there any alternatives to oats that you feel is still going to, give a lot of those health benefits?
Yeah, so there's lots of options. We have loads of ideas also on our Instagram page at Zoe with different alternatives as well. We've actually done a whole article on our blog on different alternatives for oats for breakfast. One great idea, it's really simple, is chia seeds. Soak them overnight in either a yogurt or milk of your preference. And then in the morning, you can layer on whatever you want, just like we did with the oats day. You can layer on nut butters, seeds, berries, etc.
And the chia seed is also something that's really good for me?
Absolutely, packed with fiber, loads of great health benefits from chia seeds. So you'll get all the benefits and you won't get the downside of the blood sugar peaks that you have.
Amazing. So I think my takeaway from this episode overall is I'm definitely going to try some oats in my diet again because I think, my takeaway from this experiment is that if I was having these steel cut oats, as a part of a meal, right? So not just like this massive bowl of steel cut oats, which I know is still going to cause me a problem, but actually if it's a part mixed in like you have done with a lot of the things I tend to eat, then actually I don't think it's going to cause the sort of problem. And even my experiment myself yesterday with the classic oatmeal on the stove, I was struck that it was a lot less of a spike than I'd expected because I was used to what we've sort of tried this morning. And on the other hand, I'm not about to start saying, I should have oats every morning. And I think I'm also struck, Sarah, that even with your good blood sugar control and even with all the things that you put on top of that oatmeal this morning, you actually managed to get like a pretty amazing amount of blood sugar response, which does show that when it is sort of smashed up, it does get into your blood really fast, right? And so this thing that you often talk to me about how much the complexity of the food, your famous food matrix, like how much that really affects your blood sugar is amazing.
Yeah, and I've learned something from doing this experiment as well because I stopped eating porridge probably about 30 years ago because I would feel so hungry within an hour or so. And I'd feel quite rubbish as well within an hour or so. And it was really interesting yesterday when I had the porridge that was this old-fashioned porridge, the rolled oat porridge, and had all of these other bits added to it, actually how good I felt and how full I felt for longer. So I've now, through doing this experiment, gained an extra breakfast in my breakfast repertoire. But I won't be having these ground oats for sure.
That does seem to be the takeaway. And in fact, talking about takeaway, I'm going to try and do a quick summary. My biggest takeaway today is that instant oats are not our friend. I have spent most of this podcast with a headache, which is not usual. And I managed to spike my blood sugar up to like 11, which is remarkable. And my learning is there's this huge difference between the types of oat.
Yep.
And so, instant at one end is like almost just like eating sugar, but then I can go to rolled, which is much better, and steel cut, which is the best.
Yep.
And so if I'm going to go out and buy this from the supermarket, I'd like to try and get steel cut oats if I can. And the next best is this sort of large pre-rolled oats that if I look on the back of the pack, actually, I want the thing that says the longest cooking time. That is also telling me that this is much more like the original food. And I want there to be one ingredient, oats. I've also learned that there's really strong scientific evidence to say that oats can support your health. And you said there was a study of, I think, 500,000 people, and that the people who are eating oats had a lower risk of dying, which I like. So I like the idea of putting a little bit of oats into my diet. You said there's a lot of good things in the food. And as always, we should be careful of people who say there's just like one ingredient that causes the health. And so you're saying the beta-glucan is part of it,
Yep.
but probably not all of it. And we have to be really careful because you need to eat, I think you said 3 grams of that a day to get the benefit. And so I think my other big takeaway was oat milk is not, in fact, as healthy as I had thought it was, because you need to drink 2 pints of oat milk a day to get that benefit that you talk about. And actually the oat milk itself is very processed. So it's like, it's been chopped down, it's been broken down with these chemicals. And so you said, there are good reasons you might want to do it for environmental reasons or animal welfare reasons, but actually in terms of health, you're not saying it's bad, but you're not saying it's actually better than cow's milk. And then finally, we talked about the pesticides. And I think your takeaway was you were not personally very worried about it. If you can afford it, yes, you would go and choose the organic oats because of the way that it tends to be higher in these pesticides than most other grains. But if you couldn't afford it, that wouldn't be for you a reason not to take oats.
Correct.
Brilliant. Well, I really enjoyed that, particularly the fact that now I'm finished and I can now eat some other food that will hopefully balance me out. I really enjoyed this thing being made, science made real. And I hope a few listeners also enjoyed seeing one of the world's leading nutritional scientists actually talk us through a real live experiment here on the podcast.
I loved it. And Jonathan, I'd love to invite you to come to my lab for one of our next podcasts so we can actually do some of the experiments that we've talked about before. You'll have to be the guinea pig. It's not going to be as easy as just eating porridge, though. We'll be taking blood, looking at your poo, looking at your spit, all sorts.
The things I do for Zoe. Sarah, it would be a pleasure.
Great. I'm going to hold you to that.
Yeah, I'll be there. Thank you. If you enjoyed this conversation with Sarah all about oats, then you'll love this recent episode with her, all about how to lower cholesterol. And oats is just one suggestion in there. Thanks for watching this episode, and see you next time.